life conversation number 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay, so we talked a bit about people that we do appreciate and that we want to treat um, as as a good example. Now, what would be a counterexample to that? I mean, what would be a person whom, for example, most of us or many of us admire, but we really should not?
Well, people admire philanthropists who donate a lot of money, but I think that sometimes we admire people who donate money where, although they are doing some good, they could have done so much more good that we should perhaps not admire them for doing as much. Let me say that again. That we should take into account that they could have done so much more good, and that should temper our admiration of them. And that's especially so if we think that perhaps they had other motives for their choices. For example, donating a building which would have their name on it, so that their name would be remembered, I guess, for a long time. And as I'm at Princeton University, I can't help thinking of the many buildings that have been built, sometimes very expensive buildings. We have a very expensive art center that was started off with a gift of over $100 million. And of course, it's named after the donor. So I really think that even though it's nice for the university to have that art center, Princeton is an extremely wealthy institution. It has an endowment of around 20 billion, and there are so many other institutions that needed money much more, quite apart, of course, from organizations that are helping people in extreme poverty. Could have done a huge amount of good with this. So I think we shouldn't really admire people who are giving in that way, where it's not doing as much good as it could.
So, yes, so what would you say about a person who would donate money for building let's say, a hospital and still wanted his name to be on that building?
I suppose that if the hospital were the best way of doing good with the money, I would say, okay, well, I don't really mind that he wants his name on the building. But very often this will not be the case because you will have, say, wealthy Americans who donate a hospital in their own area because they don't want their name on a hospital in Mali or Sudan, for example. Exactly. They want their name on a hospital where they live. So an example of this that I got from the website of the Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors was, I think it was someone, a member of the Packard family, I need to check that, who donated a hospital in Palo Alto in California. Palo Alto is one of the richest towns in the whole of the United States, which of course is one of the richest countries in the world. And even though it's good that there's this extra hospital there, additional medical facilities to what would have been there before, again, there are places that have no medical facilities and that could have benefited so much more by not necessarily a big expensive hospital, but by small clinics and paramedical services that I don't really admire somebody who does that.
And how about admiring people who cross our limits? Like, I saw this amazing film about Neil Armstrong lately, and there are people who walk up Himalayas or do other very dangerous, crazy things that people believe they are heroes. Are they heroes?
Yes, I was thinking about that myself because I attended a New Yorker festival event at which Alex Honnold was speaking. Alex Honnold did the first ever free climb of El Capitan, which is a 3,000 feet sheer cliff in Yosemite National Park in California. And he was climbing this completely without ropes or any other safety equipment. And uh, on the one hand, you have to admire both the incredible skill to be able to do that, to be able to, holds that basically you and I could barely see, some little ledge or bulge in the rock or a crack or something like that, that he can support his weight on and even move higher from that position. So that's an incredible skill. Then there's the bravery of doing this very perilous feat that nobody had ever done before. So you admire both the climbing skill and the bravery, but you also think, why exactly? Why is it so important that somebody does this? Uh, Presumably, a lot of effort goes into it, a lot of preparation, a lot of training, some expense, I guess, in preparing for this in various ways. I don't really know. Um,
Yeah,
could
so if it wasn't for expenses, if it wasn't for money, yes, that they spend on something that risky, yes, would you think that that it doesn't matter that because they do not do any harm to anyone, then they can go on with it? Or it's the matter that yes, of course they can go on with it, but there is nothing or not much to be to be to praise them for, or maybe that we can praise them, but we should keep in mind that there are people who do other things, much better things, and are still not being a proper
acknowledge.
acknowledged.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Well, I certainly think, as I say, we can specifically admire the courage and their skills. But I think we should, at the same time, raise at least a question about their priorities, why they have made this the overarching goal of their life, and whether they could have done better things. Perhaps there's an argument that once you could do this, once you have this incredible achievement and you become well known because of it, and a film has been made about Alex Honnold's climb, then you can achieve other things. Then you have the standing, the reputation. I know that you mentioned Himalayan climbers, right? I know that some Himalayan climbers have done great things for Nepal.
Yes,
They've
exactly.
established schools or hospitals along the routes that they use to get to Everest, right?
Yeah.
So in the end, something very good can come out of that. But of course, it doesn't always. And yes, not everyone gets as famous as Hillary, because only one person can be the first person to get to the top of Mount Everest.
So
So
do you admire Neil Armstrong?
I admire his courage in sticking with this program, the Apollo program, even after several astronauts had lost their lives on the way. So yes, he was brave to do that. Um, Arguably, he was not that good to his wife and children because they risked losing him. Um,
Mhm.
s-
Well,
uh,
as for utilitarianism, as we are utilitarians, we should not measure that. Yes, I mean, if he was good for the rest of the world and they did something that changed the world perspective, then
in the case of Neil Armstrong, the question is, yes, of course, everybody was watching the moon landing. Everybody thought, wow, there's a man on the moon. Fantastic. But even at the time, even before the success of the mission, people questioned the expenditure. They questioned whether that money could have been better spent helping, again, educate some of the poorer people in the United States, or doing other good things. And in a way, you'd have to say, what did the Apollo mission achieve? Actually, the moon has been visited, but it hasn't changed. It's nothing very much on Earth has changed, except that when we look at the moon, we can say, well, humans got there.
So you don't have this romantic thinking that we as a species achieved something amazing. It's because we went up there to the stars.
No, I
That
don't.
it was like a huge step for humanity, yes, because we really did that. We are able to do that. We are able to go into space. Yes, I mean now people are thinking of going to Mars.
Right, and in fact, we have landed spacecraft on Mars, and they've taken photos and sent back images. That's really, just as difficult in a way. If we hadn't landed on the moon in that particular year, we would have done it at some other time, maybe a lot more safely, because we would have had better and safer rocket technology.
Okay.
And so I'm a significant part of it also, of course, was that the Americans wanted to do it before the Russians did it. And again, that's not a motive that I would really admire.
Okay. That's interesting that now we are talking about motives for action. Yes, as a utilitarian. Do you count motives for action?
Well, utilitarians draw a distinction between whether we are saying that an action was a good thing, that it was good that that was done. As so, for example, we could say, was it good that humans went to the moon? And we distinguish that from assessing the agent, praising or blaming the agents involved. So in this particular case, you were asking me about Neil Armstrong. I think it's a different question as to what we think of his motives. That's one question. What we think of the motives of, was it John F. Kennedy who decided to launch the project? What we think of his motives, and to what extent were they, as I said, to what extent did rivalry with the Russians play a part? To what extent perhaps did political advantage play a part? So we might, if we learnt that political advantage played a large role and rivalry with the Russians played a large role, we might think less of Kennedy for having made that decision than if he had some larger motive to benefit the world as a whole.
And what if the main motive is to gain the knowledge? So I'm sure that most of the people involved in such things, as they are now in maybe the mission to Mars, yes, they want to cross the borders, yes, they want to get the knowledge, they want to do something extraordinary for its own for its own sake, yes.
So
It's
I
not,
don't,
to
yeah.
gain money or fame or now gain something in politics. It's rather really, in a way, I'm asking, if a human being is such that he needs those borders to cross. Yes, he needs to go further. He needs to get this incredible aim that he tries to achieve, or otherwise life becomes boring or not interesting or not worth living.
But what about the incredible aim of eliminating extreme poverty on our planet? Or, for that matter, the incredible aim of ending the use of fossil fuels, which we know are endangering the planet. Those don't seem to attract the same enthusiasm as some of these other missions, whether they are to go to the moon or to go to Mars or uh, to climb some rock face, and yet they seem to me to be far more worthy objectives.
Don't you think that many troubles that go with famine or with fuels and so on, that's politics, yes? So we are not fully able to overcome simply terrible politicians who play, games and do not allow us to help people or to to use energy that would be ecological and so on. It's because actually there are many people who work on sustainable
Sustainable development.
development and
Yes.
so on, right?
Yes, and I admire those people, and I admire, you know, I admire the people who put money into trying to change this, to try to develop clean fuels, or also people who try to overcome this problem of politics by getting better people elected and perhaps even trying to change political institutions. They are, in some ways, more difficult problems than landing on the moon. But I do think that we ought to admire the people who are trying to put their resources or their skills, their energy into doing those things. You asked me a moment ago about knowledge as something that we were seeking when we went to the moon, or now when we're sending missions to Mars. I'm not sure that I regard knowledge in itself as a good. I think it's knowledge that will lead to other benefits that is the good. It's true that sometimes we don't know which knowledge will benefit. Sometimes what seems to be pure research, pure search for knowledge in some particular area, then turns out to have some remarkable benefits for us. But in the case of going to the moon, for instance, I think it was probably predictable that the amount of knowledge gained from that might not be proportionate to the amount of resources that went into it. Because, what was really difficult and made the mission so much more expensive was that if you send a man to the moon, you need to get that man back from the moon. And so it was a much more complicated mission than if you'd sent a spacecraft to land on the moon, send back information about the moon, but not have to return.
And then let people die.
No. I'm thinking about an unmanned mission.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, no, I'm thinking about which has happened with Mars, of course. We got a lot of information from Mars for that. So that's why I think the mission to the moon was not really about knowledge. It was not about trying to get as much knowledge as we can for what we're spending. It was more about the prestige of sending a human being to the moon and back again.
So should we send a man to Mars?
I think the only purpose of sending human beings to Mars would be if it were possible for humans to actually live on Mars indefinitely without support from Earth. Because one of the things that I do think is worth trying to ensure is the survival of our species. And if we could colonize other planets, then if there were some catastrophe on Earth, which could be something like a huge asteroid colliding with Earth, or it could be a pandemic, either a natural pandemic or something done by a terrorist that wipes everybody out on Earth. And if there were humans living and surviving and reproducing on Mars, then eventually they could recolonize Earth and other planets and the species would survive. And I think that's a worthwhile goal. So to me, that would be the value in sending people to Mars, not simply sending someone to Mars because so that some human has been to Mars and then they come back again.
Do you think that human extinction would be a bad thing? Many of my colleagues who work for animal rights, for example, say that an Earth would be our Earth would be much a better place without humans.
It's true, of course, that without humans, the 70-something billion animals currently in factory farms would not be in factory farms. If we were all wiped out, I guess.
I mean, all the wild animals could live as well. Yes, I mean now.
Well,
we are the cause of the biggest extinction.
Right, but I'm concerned about animal suffering and individual suffering more than I'm concerned about the extinction of species. And compared to the number of wild animals who we drive into extinction, um, that's really rather small compared to the number of animals we have in factory farms. If you look at where animals are on Earth, the greatest number of animals are not talking about insects, of course, but certainly the greatest number of larger animals are the chickens and other animals on factory farms.
Okay, but how about biodiversity and the thing that we may cause the extinction of species, of so many species on Earth that will never be back, right?
Yes. I
Do you think there is value in biodiversity and in that we preserve panda or lions or elephants on Earth?
I'm not sure that I think there's value in biodiversity as such. I think that there is value in the existence of animals who are having good lives, positive lives. But there's some debate about whether wild animals actually have positive lives at all. That's a question that we could debate. And also, as I say, I mean, the number of pandas, for example, is tiny. So if we're thinking about the suffering of individual animals, the fact that pandas might be pushed into extinction is not really an issue about animal suffering. It is only an issue about biodiversity and extinction. Now, as long as there are humans who survive, then you might say, well, the loss of biodiversity is bad for humans, and future generations, maybe over millions of years to come, will regret the loss of these amazing species that took millions of years to evolve and that are completely irreplaceable. So, on the condition that there are humans, we could see biodiversity as a great loss. But if we are now assuming the extinction of our species, then I'm not sure that the extinction of other species on the planet adds a huge amount to that loss. And as I say, that would depend to some extent on your judgment as to whether you think that the lives of wild animals are positive or not. And there are quite good reasons for thinking that there are not, especially in species where the method of reproduction is that there's a huge number of offspring, of which very few survive. So, for instance, this would be the case with many fish or with sea turtles or something like that. The hundreds of eggs hatch and only a couple of them survive, and the others, maybe some of them, die miserable, have short and miserable lives. So it's not clear to me that the lives of wild animals are positive on the whole. And going back to the question of whether the extinction of our species would be a bad thing, that raises the question of if we do survive and if we become wiser and also more ethically concerned about all non-human animals, as I hope we will, maybe we will actually do something to improve the lives of non-human animals, to reduce their suffering. I'm talking about wild animals now. And now, of course, some ecologists would think we should not, but we should simply allow them to live untouched by human activity. But I'm not sure that that's right, if indeed it's true that their lives contain a lot of suffering. Maybe in the long run, our descendants will think that it would be wise to try to reduce that suffering.
Okay, and how about the idea that we are creatures that suffer so much that we add up to the sum of suffering in the world, and it would be better if we didn't exist because of that reason?
That raises two distinct questions. One is whether that is accurate as a description of human existence now. And personally, I doubt that it is. Most humans, when you ask them, and there have been these global surveys carried out, how do they value their lives? Put a number on it out of 10, where 10 is the best possible life and 0 is the most miserable life. Most of them are somewhere around 6 to 7. So most people seem to think that their lives are worth living and are positive. But even if you were to challenge that and you say, well, they're deluded about this, you still need to think about what is likely to happen in the future. And I believe that things, if we do survive, things are likely eventually to get better. I wouldn't predict when, but I think we'll develop better technologies that will enable us to meet all our needs. And I also think, as I've argued in my book, The Expanding Circle, that our ethics does improve over time. And so I think
So
that
you believe in progress?
I believe in progress. Yes, that's right. I think that if we do survive, the lives of future generations will definitely be positive, um, even if you think that the lives of the present generation are not.
Okay. So now let's talk about utilitarianism. Yes, so this conversation will be added somewhere within the first conversation when we talked about utilitarianism and over demandingness. Okay, so there is an argument against utilitarianism that if you as a utilitarian ask someone to donate a kidney, for example, or donate a big percentage of your money and so on, you're over demanding. So you are too demanding. You ask for too much, and it's crazy, or people will not do that anyway. And also, of course, there are many philosophical arguments that say that that simply ethics um, is not to be that demanding. It shouldn't present principles or rules mm, that ask people to do almost things that are impossible to do.
Well, utilitarianism is the view that the right action is the one that does uh, the most good, understood as the, does the most to increase net well-being, which you could increase by increasing happiness or reducing suffering, or of course doing both. But it's the greatest possible surplus of happiness over suffering that the classical hedonistic version of utilitarianism says is the criterion for the right action. It's true that if you hold that view, then it seems to follow that utilitarianism is a very demanding ethic, because for those of us living comfortable lives in the affluent world, there seems to be a huge number of things that we could do that would reduce suffering of people in extreme poverty in particular. And we could reduce our consumption to bare necessities in order to have the maximum amount to spare to send to effective charities that would then use that to uh, provide various forms of assistance for people that would save the lives of children who might otherwise die of malaria or of diarrhea, uh, or would provide them with enough food or other some minimal health care, other basic necessities. So yes, in that way, utilitarianism is very demanding. Is it over demanding? Is this an objection to utilitarianism? I don't think so. I think it's a conclusion that we justifiably come to in a world that is as unequal and as divided as our world. And also, of course, in a world in which, although there are many affluent people, very few of them are really doing anything significant to help people in extreme poverty.
So
Uh,
you mean that it's the fault of the world, not of the theory?
exactly, exactly. It's the fault of the world combined with the fact that people are not acting on the theory. If everyone were acting on the theory, it wouldn't be so demanding, because if all of the more than a billion wealthy people in the world were to give even 10% of their wealth to people in poverty, then I don't think there would be people in extreme poverty not having enough food or not having even the most minimal health care. So it's it's a theory that has arisen in a world in which most of us are selfish to a degree that is not really defensible in terms of that theory. And we're selfish because we're not purely ethical creatures and we're not purely rational creatures. We are evolved beings. We are all the descendants of ancestors who made sure that they got enough food to survive, made sure that they had the opportunity to reproduce, and made sure that their offspring survived to the age where they could also reproduce.
Okay, so that's about a selfish gene. Do you think that if nature made us so, yes, so that, evolution, of course, made us so that we need to be a bit, at least, egoistic to survive? Don't you think that morality should not ask us not to be? In a way, if it's naturally given that we are egoists, why morality should ask for something else?
Morality is not derived from evolution. I don't think we can take moral lessons from evolution. Evolution is just the way life developed on this planet. It's not guided by any hidden hand of providence or anything of that sort, and it has no goals. It's not goal directed. So it would be a mistake to say evolution has made us like this and ethics should take some lesson for that and not go contrary to it.
So who makes the goal?
We have to decide what we think of as the right goals of our action, but this is not an arbitrary choice. This is something that I believe reflecting on, thinking about, reasoning on is enables us to see.
Do you believe in objective goals?
Yes, I do think that it's objectively right to reduce suffering, for example, and increase happiness. I think that is objective. Let me just say one more thing about evolution, because some people will say to what I said a moment ago, that after all, our reason is also a product of evolution. And that's true, of course. We developed the ability to reason because it helped us to survive, helped us to solve problems, evade predators, find ways of getting food, and so on. But once we develop the ability to reason, we also develop the ability to see ourselves in the world, to see that we are just one among billions of other sentient beings in the world, to recognize that they also have lives that can go well or badly, and to see that just as in our own situation, we regard it as bad if we suffer, if we can't get things that we want, if we are miserable, so it is also bad for others who have comparable interests for their lives to go badly. So I think that, yes, reason is a product of evolution, but reason in a way enables us to reflect on evolution, to understand evolution, and therefore to push against some of the tendencies that evolution has, always within constraints of being realistic about what we can expect people to do.
The reason freed itself from evolutionary principles.
Yes, well, evolution, sorry, reason freed us from blind subordination to the course of evolution. Yeah. So we become aware of it, and we make decisions that may be constrained in various ways by our evolved nature, but that don't simply have to blindly go along with it. And talking about these constraints takes me back to the question you asked before about the over-demandingness of utilitarianism as a moral theory. I think we need to recognize that most humans are selfish to a degree, and so we don't want to blame people for following their selfish nature to a limited extent, but we want to encourage them to push against that at times as well. So I think we want to try to improve the standard of conduct and to use our assessment of others, praising and blaming them, in a way that does not set the standard unrealistically high so that nobody takes any notice of it, but at the same time is not simply static, is not simply accepting the way people are now, but is rather seeing what can be done to improve the way we respond to situations in which we have the opportunity to help others and could easily do so.
I think that we can encourage people to do good by showing them that um, it's in their own interest to be good. In other way, we talked about motives, yes, so and ethical motives. So do you think that it's morally right, morally fine to tell people, look, if you are better to others, you will feel good yourself. That's going back to egoism, or rather to try to unify two different views. Yes, so egoism and morality. Are you prepared to to say that it's right to do?
I'm certainly prepared to say that in trying to encourage people to help others, to be generous, to think about others. Uh, we should inform them about uh, the fact that for many people this is a rewarding thing to do, that it makes their lives more meaningful, and that once people start to do that, they often do it gladly and think that their lives are better because of it. Um, Charlie Bressler, who's the director of the Life You Can Save, the organization that I founded that helps people in extreme poverty, um, came to this position after a successful career in retail in the retail industry, where he'd made quite a lot of money, but he had not lived in accordance with his own values. And he has said to me that we should not present the Life You Can Save as making demands for people to make sacrifices, because in his own case, he felt that coming to work for the Life You Can Save, and I should say, by the way, he's a volunteer worker. He works very hard on it full time, and he not only takes no salary, but he actually donates some of the money that he earned in his previous career to support the organization. He says the life that he saved, the first life that he saved, was his own, because his life has been so much better since he started doing this.
That's very sweet, but lots of people would say when it's not morality, it's pure egoism. Yes. Now, how can we praise a person who does something for his own sake? Yes, for his own interest. Yes, he does a lot of good, but people then say, well, we are all egoists. Even if we help, we are just pure egoists because, after all, you do that for yourself. Yes. So now the question is, of course, it's fine. It's good because it still produces good consequences, but maybe there is nothing to praise for such a person.
No, I don't agree. I think that it's, um, in a way, it empties the term egoism of its negative connotations. When you say that someone is an egoist, if they are spending most of their time doing good for others, and whatever the ultimate motive, even if they're aware of the fact that this makes their own life go better, if it makes their own life go better because they know that they're helping other people, then that's a good thing. We want to have more people like this. The ideal world would be one in which we all got satisfaction and fulfillment from helping others and making the lives of others go better. So I think we want to encourage that kind of character. And although I can understand that in some very broad sense of the term, you can say that's egoism. I think that it's a misappropriation of the term. It's certainly not selfishness in the sense of being focused on yourself. It's actually being focused on others and wanting to help them with some side effects, if you like, of a benefit for yourself.
So it would be a perfect situation, right, in which by helping others, you're happy yourself, or you have a good life because you share it with others.
Absolutely. Yes. We can only wish that everyone in the world would be like that.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, last thing about politics. Yes, are we going to talk
Yes.
about it? Okay. So, as far as I know, there was this period in your life when you wanted not only to be a philosopher and thinker, but also a politician. Can you tell us why? And how did it end? And what did you do in politics?
Right. Well, I mentioned Bob Brown a little while ago, the Tasmanian doctor who helped to save the Franklin River from being dammed and founded the Australian Greens as a political party. So my period of politics was related to that. When the Greens were founded in Victoria, the state where I was living, I joined as a foundation member, the first group of members, went to some of the first meetings about it, because I supported the causes here. I supported the preservation of the environment. I supported the protection of animals and a variety of other causes that the Greens stood for. And I thought that it was desirable to have a political party, even if it was going to be a minority party, to encourage other parties to pick up environmental issues. It's perhaps worth saying here that the Australian voting system is a preferential system. It's what Americans sometimes call instant runoff. So, unlike the United States, where in the 2000 election, George W. Bush won the election because he won the state of Florida, and he won the state of Florida because Ralph Nader, who was running as a Green, got, I think, something like 80,000 votes. And if we assume that the majority of those voters would have voted for Gore rather than Bush, because after Gore was very early talking about climate change and Bush had no positive environmental record, then Gore would have become president. So I would never stand for a party like the Greens in the American political system if that meant there was a chance that the worse alternative would get elected. But in the Australian political system, if there's a minority party and nobody gets more than 50% of the votes, then you look at the second preferences of the voters for the minority party. So the voters fill in all the different boxes. You vote, let's say, 1 Greens, 2 Australian Labor Party, 3 Liberals, if those are the 3 parties standing. So in that system, I thought it was a good thing to have a Greens party that would try to show the major parties that people wanted to care about the environment, did care about the environment, and wanted the parties to do the right thing by the environment, and particularly climate change, of course. So when the first election came around, at which the Australian Greens existed as a national party, the party asked me if I would be the candidate, and that was probably because I was the best known member of the party in Victoria.
Which year was that?
So I think I stood twice actually. I stood once in a by-election, and then I stood for the Senate. I think 96 was when I stood for the Senate, but maybe the by-election was 95 or something like that, 94. I need to check. So I did stand for the Greens. I was not expecting to win. I didn't win, but I perhaps helped to make the Greens a little bit better known. And eventually, some years later, the Greens did win the Senate seat that I stood for. So,
okay, that's very good. Did it have any influence on you? Did you get more interested in politics, or in other way it changed your interests?
I've always been interested in politics. At one point, I was a member of the Australian Labor Party, and generally, before the Greens came along, I supported the Australian Labor Party as the more progressive of the mainstream parties. And um, when I do vote for the Greens, I give the Australian Labor Party my second preferences. Um, of course, being involved meant I was busy. I took some leave from Monash University for the Senate campaign, so for about 6 weeks, I think, so that I could run the campaign. Uh, I was interested, but I was also, I guess, somewhat disillusioned by partly by some of the negative tactics of opposition parties, but also by the difficulty of getting the media to take the policies seriously that the Greens wanted to campaign on. Um, it was very difficult to get media attention for a lot of really good policies that we wanted to put out there, and they were, much more interested in more sensational and personal things.
I think that we as philosophers should get more into politics and should encourage other philosophers and, well, people who want to work for society to be politicians, because it seems to me that especially now when politics gets worse and worse, fewer and fewer good people getting into. Yes, that you really that those who are interested in politics are usually those who want to benefit themselves.
Well, I think that's maybe a little too cynical a view of
Okay.
politics. If you looked at the uh, election we've just had in 2018 in the United States, there were a lot of good younger generation of Democrats who stood because they were so upset with the Republicans and with Donald Trump in particular. And I don't think could say all of those people were going into politics for themselves. I think they were going into politics because they didn't like the direction that American politics has been going into, and they want to stand for something better. So, yes, I encourage people to go into politics if they feel they have the ability to do that.
Do you know any philosopher in politics? Because there are quite a few in Poland, I have to say, and there are quite a few ethicists in Polish politics.
Um, I don't think I know philosophers in politics um, at the moment, but certainly there have been in the past, involved in various ways. Not always on the side that I agree with, I should say, but of course that's fine. I think philosophers going into politics could raise the standard of debate a little bit, maybe. But as I said, the problem is then to get the media to report the more interesting, the more higher level discussions rather than the more sensational details.
Okay, right. Anything that you want to add?
I think that's another good session. So let's pause it there. Thank you.